Hello and welcome to the SportsGrad podcast. My name is Ryan Walker and with me as always is the COVID safe Ruben Williams. How are you today, mate?
I'm fantastic. Thank you, Ryan. I'm well out of Melbourne, thank goodness. I'm out of the restriction zone down in Lorne, so well away from any danger, thank goodness. But very lucky to still have a bit of freedom in this part of the world.
Very good. I'm glad the itchy cough hasn't made its way down to Lorne. So it's good to see you're COVID safe. Massive episode today, Rubes. But before we start, obviously have to give love to our good friends at Deakin University, where every single course is backed by industry experts. So you can be confident that you'll get the job you want with a degree that employers want. Deakin University is progressive, real-world learning.
We love it.
We do love it. If you want to learn more about us and who we are, or want to ask us any questions, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. You can find a link to do so in the show notes. Rubes, who have we got today?
We've got a massive guest on today, Ryan. Karina Chilman, fresh off the plane from Tokyo. She's still in quarantine at the moment. But Karina is a physio who's currently just finished up in a COVID safe role with the Australian Olympic team. But prior to that, she graduated from Physio back in 2011, worked in private practice in Melbourne for 6 years, treating a range of different national and state level sporting teams and individuals. She then, get this right, she then toured Japan, Singapore and Australia with none other than Cirque du Soleil, not as an acrobat, but as part of the medical team. And since then, Karina has completed a master's in sports medicine at Melbourne University, and she's now doing research for La Trobe Sport, as well as treating as a performance physiotherapist, and doing some other mentoring with other physios around the world too, Ryan, which is absolutely awesome to hear. But most recently, as we mentioned, she's just finished up a contract with the Australian Olympic team as the Covid Liaison Officer in Tokyo at the Olympics. So she had some incredible things to teach us about what actually goes on in that environment.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I loved our chat with Karina. One of the big parts that I enjoyed was just hearing about the logistics of a COVID-safe Olympics and just all the little things that she had to do. It sounded like a bit of a nightmare, to be honest, but how in-depth they had to go to ensure the Olympics was safe for all our athletes. So it was unbelievable.
You don't hear about this stuff, Ryan. Like to actually understand like the intricate details is fascinating. There was spit flying. People are spitting in jars in the morning. Weird. The other thing that caught my attention, Ryan, was the athlete treatment process at the Olympics. So Karina mentioned they've got a team of up to 500 athletes, 750 people in the village, as part of the Australian team, and they've just got people going through there all the time. They've got athletes needing treatment going through there all the time, and the way that they manage those massive amounts of teams was fascinating as well, because it's just an entire logistical operation to deal with that sort of scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one that I enjoyed was just how to juggle a portfolio career. We spoke about a lot of people in sports medicine or just sort of in those sports science sort of areas often do jump around in different roles and go to different events and things like that. Similar to what you did with the Cricket World Cup, Rubes. And it was quite refreshing to hear how a career like that works. So very cool. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people envious of her. Alrighty, let's get cracking into it. Grab a pen, enjoy this chat with Karina. Karina, welcome to the SportsGrad podcast.
Yeah, hello guys. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure, Karina. Before we dive into everything you've been up to over in Tokyo, we want to find about this job you had with Cirque du Soleil, because that just sounds incredibly exotic. Can you tell us a bit about how did you land that role?
So I was with Cirque in the performance medicine team for a couple of years. So I was with one of their big top touring shows called Curious. So each show is like a little independent company of the whole company. So there's about 44 touring shows prior to COVID, there was anyway. So I was there for a couple of years working with a group of physios just to keep all of the artists healthy, essentially, and doing a 10 show load every single week. It was really fun, really cool.
Okay, how is this something that was just like advertised online? You thought, oh, that'd be fun, I'll apply for that. And what like, do they make you jump through hoops or anything? Like, what's the interview process like?
Yeah, so I saw it on like the APA Sports Physio Facebook group actually, and there's actually quite a few Aussies that work in headquarters in Montreal now, so they always post the jobs on all the Australian advertising websites as well, and then a very sort of standard interview process that was, I think, 3 parts. So yeah, you do like a clinical exam where you get interviewed by a panel of their senior sports medicine practitioners, and they ask you like very clinical questions, and then once you get through that process, it's more like a soft skills exam with a panel as well. So your ability to communicate, work in a team, how would you cope with being on tour, and they give you scenarios and you have to explain how you would manage in that environment. And then the third interview was a much more casual interview directly with the particular show that they were going to place you on, and that's with like the company director, artistic director, and the other physios, and pretty much to see like if you would fit in, because it's an environment where there's absolutely no choice. You have to work as a team and you have to get along, because you live, work, celebrate, socialize, travel, you do everything together. So I think the first question they asked me was like, what's your favorite movie? And, tell us about a scenario where you had a bad experience overseas. They're really trying to suss you out as a person, because you're overseas for really big chunks of time, constantly moving around. So that was a pretty big process. The hardest thing for me was because they were all they're in Montreal and like northern like USA, and I was in Melbourne, and so the interviews were at really weird times of day where I would normally be asleep or like just waking up, so it was hard to be in the right frame of mind to answer questions when you're like thinking about going to bed or you've just got up at 4 a.m.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
Sounds like a rigorous process. Like if I think of any interview I've been in, it's kind of just like the latter 2 stages that you just spoke about, not really the practical side of things. They're not like testing me.
Yeah. The
that's why we're not
exam
physios, right?
Yeah. They just sort of know that you know what you're talking about. The actual one of the funniest parts of that process was they offered me the job on the Saturday night, and I signed all the contracts and everything on the Sunday morning, and then I played a game of basketball with some friends that afternoon. I broke my foot.
Oh God.
Dear.
So the next day I had to call in sick to my normal job and be like, so I've broken my foot and I can't work, and I'm also moving to Japan in 6 weeks. So
I would have loved that.
I was not their favourite person that day. But yeah, I think I got out of the cast like 3 weeks before leaving to move to Japan. So that was quite a hectic time period.
Yeah. Wow.
There you go. That's awesome. The interview process sounds very similar to one described to us by Ermila Rosario, and she is the team manager of the Australian women's cricket team. And similar sort of things like, hey, here's a whole bunch of scenarios that come up on tour. How would you handle them? And then tell us what you like and show us how well you're going to fit in, because there's not too many people on tour and they've all got to get along. So, what's your favourite movie becomes a very important question for those types of situations.
Yeah. And the environment is really different depending on like what country you're in, because if you're working in Melbourne, you know that you have an abundance of experts in every single area and a really big like list of people, or if there's an emergency scenario, that you call an ambulance sort of thing. Whereas when you're on tour, you really have to be relying on like what's in your inner circle, and know that the people that you're working with, you need to put like you're so much trust in them. So it is a really different environment, and some people thrive in it, and some people, they hate it and they don't last very long.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Well, one of the incredible scenarios you found yourself in is over in Tokyo just recently. I know I was really looking forward to planning a trip to Tokyo 2020 a couple of years ago, and a lot of people would have loved to be there.
Yeah.
You got this incredible opportunity to go over and work with the Australian Olympic team. Firstly, I'd love to know, where were you and how did you react when you found out you would be going to Tokyo?
It was a pretty crazy phone call. I work with quite a big research team in a female athlete health study, and the position I was in was called Covid Liaison Officer. So they had a senior Covid Liaison Officer who was Kate Marnie from the New South Wales Institute of Sport, and she'd been working with Ian Chesterman and the AOC, and then the role essentially grew and grew and grew, and they realised that they were going to need additional people to help with the physical amount of workload that was coming through in order to fulfill the role, and they offered it to me, and Kate and I worked on that along with some other people in the lead up to the game. So there was quite a big pre-games preparation load to essentially follow the requirements to ensure a COVID-safe Olympics. And then while we were on the ground in Tokyo, it was, managing all of the day-to-day COVID-related things and liaising with all the sports to make sure that they understood what they needed to do, and helping, plan so that everyone knew what was happening. So yeah, it was quite a strange process of how it happens, but I think that's pretty much any role that pops up in sport now. It's not always the advertised role online. It's sometimes right place, right time, and you've got to make a really quick decision that yes, I am 100% in, and I can start working with you from tomorrow because you need someone to do this right now. And we have a really good working relationship and can sort of safely know that we can rely on each other to do what needs to be done. And that, she knew that I could pretty much pack up and go, and that my other employers would probably be okay with it. Because it's going to be 7 weeks away total by the time I get home.
Wow.
It's a decent period of time.
It's probably not the role that you would have envisioned you'd be going to Tokyo to do, say, 2 years ago now. The role wouldn't exist and won't exist probably at the next Olympics. How weird's that?
Well, we hope not.
Well, if it is, there goes Paris, Rubes. But
for sure.
Weird one. What are the day-to-day things you had to do? You mentioned, obviously keeping everyone sort of COVID safe. But are there any sort of really interesting things that you had to do in that role?
Yeah, there was a few. So in the lead up, it was working with all of the sports so that they understood what was being put in place by Tokyo, and how, especially with, a really big group of athletes, for example, that has, 60 athletes that are coming over and all of their staff, and how they're actually going to help manage the logistics of what needs to be done in order to get into the country and abide by the rules. And Australians are a really, really diligent country, and we weren't doing all of the precautions and the COVID testing and everything every day just to follow the rules. We were doing it because we wanted to be safe, and we wanted to know that we were being really cautious with everything, because we definitely didn't want anyone to A, get sick, or B, have to be withdrawn from an event because they were a close contact or they contracted COVID while we were in the village with 11,000 people from all corners of the globe, but on a day-to-day basis. So everyone had to be COVID tested every single day, and we had to do some temperature checking and inputting that on an app, and some daily health symptom reporting, and just the general COVID safety measures, like maintaining a bubble within the Australian team, so really limiting any interaction with other people in the village as best as you can. always wearing a mask and making sure that we had that, really planned out so that everyone had plenty and everyone was, happy to, if you saw someone not wearing a mask, you're not telling them off, you're keeping them safe and, maintaining that sort of social distancing as best you can in an environment like that, because you don't actually have that much space. And we have a really big team. So the day-to-day things were quite funny at sometimes, because it was a daily saliva test. And everyone had to spit in these tubes every single day, and then they had to all be collated and then delivered to a submission centre. So I never thought in my life that I would be, dealing with that
Collecting
that many,
saliva.
collecting saliva, exactly. But
Not just
you
any
just
saliva,
have to laugh.
gold medal saliva.
That's what we were saying. We were like, gee, this saliva might be worth something one day.
Exactly. Put that on eBay. Put that on the dark web. Someone will buy it.
But it was a really good system, and then coordinating the departure COVID testing as well, in order to get everyone back into Australia or to whatever country they were going on to next. So yeah, every person was tested every single day, and then in the lead up to leaving, some days we were doing multiple tests a day, in order to make sure that we had the appropriate certifications to leave the country. So yeah, it was quite funny. They did a really good job, TOCOG, at that's I can't even do the maths of how many thousands of tests they turned over on top of the Japanese public as well, that they were having a thing.
Goodness.
But it was, you were really in a bubble in the village, and then we maintained an Australian bubble quite well as well. And everyone was really diligent with that.
How many people were part of the entire Australian team, including staff and athletes?
I think it was around 750.
750, gosh.
Yeah, but not everyone was there at the same time. And a lot of people were at various sort of sub-sites, so like surfing and sailing, golf, football was in a different area. So yeah, there was quite a lot of sports that weren't necessarily all in the village, and unfortunately some of those sports, they didn't get to come to the village, so it would have been a really different experience for them going into Tokyo. But it was a safety thing, they're safer in their village sub-site than they would be here. So it was a hard call, but, we had no problems. So it was good.
Yeah. So when you're dealing with a team of that size and you've got athletes who need, medical treatment to get prepared for their events, what sort of preparation goes into the logistics of getting that medical centre set up? For example, I've done a tour with the New Zealand women's cricket team, and they had a physio travel with them. And basically it was, grab the physio table, grab the medical kit bag, chuck it under the bus, go to the next place, set it up, because, we got a team of about 18 girls to look after, and that was it.
Yeah.
Whereas with you guys, you've got up to 750 people. There's a few people on deck, and you've got all these restrictions in place as well. What sort of preparation do you have to do in advance to get that medical centre set up?
So the medical teams were sort of set depending on the sports themselves. So a lot of the sports, for example, the bigger team sports, they would have their own medical staff that they work with full time. So like the Matildas and the soccer and the basketball, they are a physio and doctor and massage and dietitian that work with that sport on a daily basis, and they've been there for the whole preparation and they're with them. So they are essentially very much in-house, and they can manage things, and they're really all over it from their own sport perspective. Then in the village there was the medical HQ, which had our Chief Medical Officer, David Hughes, who coordinated that medical team, and that consisted of physios, doctors, nurses, general practitioners, remedial massage therapists, performance services, psychology, dietetics, nutrition, you name it, it was there. And they were there, people from the state and national institutes of health and sport, and they could be accessed by anyone. So And there was just a booking system, so those sports people or the teams could book certain times to use recovery or gym or access sort of any of those performance services or medical services as they needed. And they had just an absolutely incredible group of people working in that medical team. It was such an enjoyable group to work with on a daily basis, and they just, you couldn't get a better group. And then, as needed, the teams that already had their medical teams, they could call on that group if they needed a second opinion, or they had an issue that they needed, or they needed imaging or something like that. In the Olympic Village, there's also like the big polyclinic, which is essentially like a pseudo hospital in the middle of the village that you could access additional medical care like MRIs or doctors and things like that. I would say it was quite rare that anyone from the Australian team used the polyclinic, except for, emergency MRIs or those type of things, because we had such an amazing group of people, which is another element of keeping our athletes safe, because that polyclinic could be considered a really high risk area because of so many people coming in and out from all the different countries and all the different sports. So the planning is definitely not like when you're traveling with your sports team and you pick up your physio table and your medical bag on the other shoulder and you walk in. They had absolutely everything that you could possibly require, and they did a really amazing job. And, just listening to the way that some of the sports spoke about the medical team, it really warms your heart. What a wonderful service they were providing under sometimes trying conditions.
The booking system you just mentioned, because my next question was going to be, how do you, what's the process behind treating the entire team, which, I don't know, athletes, I think it was like nearly 500.
Yeah.
I'd imagine you'd have to be working pretty much around the clock in order to service 500 athletes. Were there literally appointments being made in all hours of the night?
For the medical clinic, they did work some pretty crazy hours, the doctors and nurses and physios and remedial massage in that HQ medical clinic, because obviously some sports wouldn't finish till really late, and some were going out to training really early in the morning. And then, a lot of it was seeing sort of excess from a team sport. For example, they might not bring 3 massage therapists, but they might want, every single player might need some type of remedial massage treatment. So they sort of had very, very efficient system of knowing when was going to be the peak times and what sports were happening, and planning to have multiple staff on at that time. And, I would say, I don't think anyone went without.
Yeah.
I think they had just such good planning and systems in place that, they were able to manage those really peak times. And it was good in that, yes, there was that 500 or so group of athletes, but they were not all there at the same time.
Yeah.
So as soon as the swimming finished, the swimmers all left, and then it was like eerily quiet.
Where is everyone?
Where is this huge group of people? So it was, the ebbs and flows of everything as per normal.
How is your time split between the work that you're doing in the athlete village and the work at some of the stadiums, and what determined, what venue you might go to for a day?
So we were pretty much solely based in the village. And it was managing everything there, because we were also helping out the sub-sites with their daily requirements and any issues that cropped up with their daily testing, being not in the village, because they did have, slightly different facilities. It was just trying to be as organised as you could to know what was going to be coming up in the next couple of days, who was arriving, who was leaving, because there was a constant, departure arrival schedule. So when the people were arriving, you needed to have a plan to meet with them, to prepare them for, what we needed them to do every day, and then planning, well, when are you leaving, or when are you potentially leaving, to pre-plan in advance, coordinating their departure certifications and things like that as well. So definitely mainly in the village. The only reason why we would go out to a venue was to sort of see what the processes were like there, how they were managing traffic flow, if we needed to make any sort of commentary on things that potentially were quite high risk, and to advise the athletes, related. And if there was a quieter day, to go and watch and support, something that you really wanted to see, which was really great to be able to get out there. But that was very, very quite rare, because we were so busy. But we were lucky enough to be able to go and watch one or two things, and sort of support the team, and then sort of come straight back to the village.
Was there a favourite moment you got to experience?
Oh, there were so many, so many special moments at that Olympics. I think also being there and living it, it's just this palpable energy coming through everyone, and just the absolute genuine enthusiasm that everyone feels for every single other person there. There was probably, I really loved when Ash Maloney got his bronze medal in the decathlon, and had his friend Cedric there supporting him on. Like, it was just such a show of sportsmanship, and it was just so exciting to watch. And then watching, the swimming, just how successful and, in particular our female swimmers were. And they were just the most humble, lovely, kind group of athletes as well. And they're just like crazy superstars. And the Boomers winning the bronze medal was such a huge moment. And the energy after that was, it was pretty fun. But yeah, there was some really like special moments as well. And, Harry Garside in the boxing, just what an absolute legend. I think he's going to become a bit of an Australian icon, and definitely a name to watch. He was just one of the genuinely coolest people I've ever seen in my life. And he was living for being there. He was loving it, and everyone was loving him. And yeah, it was really, there was lots of moments like that. And also one of my like best friends actually competed in the marathon.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so
nice.
She's a physio as well, and we studied together and have been friends for a long time. So it was pretty cool that we were both at the Olympics. So it was also really
Do you bother
surreal.
going for runs with her, or just let her be?
Oh no, I made the mistake of going for a run in the village, because you could sort of run laps, and I got lapped by the Kenyans twice.
Oh, well,
I was like, there they
cool
go again. It was very uncool at the time. I was like, I can't believe I just got lapped twice in like 600 meters. But yeah, they were probably the highlights. A lot of highlights. I could probably keep talking, but...
Yeah, nice. Well, yeah, it sounds like there'd be countless highlights. What about some challenges? Well, I was going to say lowlights, but there wouldn't be any lowlights at the Olympics. But what was the most challenging thing about working there?
I think probably towards the end, because you are there for quite a long time, and also there was quite a big lead-in period where we're working a lot as well, that by the end you're just very, very tired, and you're quite fatigued, and you sort of maybe haven't been sleeping well, and for the first couple of weeks you're definitely working a little bit on adrenaline and how fun it all is and how exciting it all is, and then by the end you can sort of tell that everything's getting a little bit harder and you're a lot more fatigued. So that was quite a big challenge, just knowing that we've been here for 3 weeks and we've still got quite a while to go, and quite a busy period, and a time where you're really conscious of not letting your guard down and letting things slide, because if someone was to test positive for COVID in that environment towards the end of the Olympics, it could have jeopardized everyone's ability to return home, because you wouldn't be allowed on your flight back to Australia, essentially. So it was, the biggest challenge was probably trying to manage that fatigue, and that was definitely a big learning for me. Was I was often being told, it's a bit of a quieter afternoon or quieter morning tomorrow, like why don't you have a sleep in or go for a rest or take some time? And I was like, no, I don't want to. I want to push through and keep working. And in hindsight, I probably should have listened when my supervisors was sort of telling me to take some time, and I was like, why? I don't need rest. Because by the end I was like, I wish I had that sleep in on that Tuesday 2 weeks ago kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine the combination of high stakes and fatigue will get most people, so I think you can be forgiven.
Yeah, but the funniest thing was everyone, was just so willing to help out or pitch in busy times. So, you know, it was probably another thing was just like learning to ask people for help. And, you know, we had, you know, some of the, you know, leading sports doctors around Australia sitting there at midnight with me helping label saliva tubes for the groups arriving the next day, and they're just doing that out of, you know, that they acknowledge that this is a really big job, and they want to pitch in because they didn't have an event that night, and you know, you really appreciate those people for doing that, because they didn't have to do it. It's not their role, but they were all willing to help out when needed.
And how did you guys like communicate with all the team managers of the different sports? Was there, you know, a morning meeting to explain this is what's happening? Was there a WhatsApp group to everyone? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so the communication pathways were all set up in advance by like the Australian Olympic Committee, because they've been communicating with sports for a really long time about virtually anything Olympic related, especially over the last 2 years. So we just would use those same pathways. So, you know, it was mainly done via Teams, so communicating with a Teams app that had the appropriate people on it, and everyone knew these were the certain channels that you would use for various information. And all the sports liaisons that work with the sports, they were really, really great to work with. They're in their jobs for a reason, and that's because they are very organised people who just get things done. So they were really great to work with. And the communication stuff, we didn't have to have a lot of communication every single day. Once they knew what was happening and they knew how to do it, they were essentially just running their own show, and we would just be there to help if problems cropped up or they needed advice or something like that. But once they were in the flow and the routine, they were very good at just getting it done because we had to.
And how do you think being a physio prepared you for the role?
I think, you know, part of being a physio or working with sport and things like that's being really organised. You know, no matter what team I've ever travelled with or sports things, or even working in a clinic, like you constantly working on quite a strict schedule, and being really organised and planning things in advance was really helpful, but also understanding what those sports are doing. So being able to talk with the sports doctors and sports physios and sports liaisons and speaking their language, sort of understanding a little bit more about that balance between, you know, we need to abide by these requirements, but, you know, you are also trying to prepare for the height of performance as well, and being able to speak to them in their language, I think was really helpful. And, you know, as a physio, you have a background in health. You understand public health. You understand public health policy and the importance of these public health parameters that were put in place to manage athlete safety. And you've worked in medical teams. You've worked as part of a multidisciplinary team, hopefully for a really long time, in whatever setting that you're working in as a physio. So you effectively have worked as a team if you're in a hospital, if you're in private practice, if you're with a sports team. So those sort of things, you know, whereas if you had come from a non-health background, but your experience was purely in logistics, you would be great at, you know, managing the day-to-day logistics planning, but you mightn't have that experience working in health with sport. Hopefully that answered your question in a roundabout way.
No, absolutely.
But yeah, it was quite funny. Everyone would be like, how did you get this job? And I'd be like, I don't know. A few people I knew who were physios that I'd worked with before, they were like, you're a physio still, aren't you? And I was like, yes.
No, well, I mean, valid question. But my next one was like, what things can people do to open up these kind of opportunities? Because as you said, like, you are a physio and you've just been the COVID liaison person for the Olympics. You know, how can people find these opportunities to step into a different role every now and again?
Yeah, well, I think that was like my sort of mindset. So when COVID hit last year, like, we quite suddenly lost our jobs with Cirque du Soleil just because the company, you know, essentially internationally had no revenue. So it was quite I think we found out we were cancelled on a Thursday, and on the Sunday we were all essentially unemployed. So I didn't know what I was going to do. So I went back to full-time study to finish my master's, and then kind of my mindset was to explore what other opportunities are out there for a physio who might not necessarily want to be full-time clinical anymore. So I started working in a research team at La Trobe University, which is really, really great. And the skills you learn it's again, you're working as a part of a really big team, but in a really different way to sort of essentially get a job done that's, going to hopefully contribute to the wider sports medicine knowledge base. And you just see the mountains of work that goes behind producing a piece of research. So that's been a really eye-opening thing. And then I just sort of was like, what other opportunities can pop up and see what's out there. So I sort of tried to expand my horizons a little bit, and that's also why I did that master's in sports medicine, because some of the subjects that you could choose, they really open up different areas of your skill set to use. So, looking at how to do evaluations and how to do, gap analysis to figure out a problem and what you might do to try and fix that problem in your industry or in your area of clinical practice. So, it's I think physios have many skills that they develop over a really long period that can be adapted into so many different areas. It just depends what you want to do and seeing what's out there. And, when you're doing professional development, it doesn't always have to be, okay, like this ankle course, this knee course, this shoulder course, those things are great. But, if you were to look at different sort of leadership programs and, different non-clinical things that might develop your experiences in a different way, then I think you'll realise that, if you're looking to not work in a clinic anymore, then your skills are really applicable to a wide variety of things. Obviously, working in a clinic is great. Like, you're just hanging out with people all day, helping them achieve their goals, doing lots of exercise-based things. It's really, really fun. But, I'd been doing it for sort of 10 years and I was ready for a bit of a change. So I don't know what's next, though.
Well, that's probably an exciting thing. And I think the health industry or people working in health seem to have done this for a lot longer, in terms that they seem to have more of a portfolio career where they might do a couple of days here, one day there. They seem to have split their time well across different places, and it's a lot more normal.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a good reminder for other people that, you can juggle your time across the course of a year or however long to do little contracts here and there, part-time work here, freelance work there. And even in operations, like there are people who are going around working in the operations of different tournaments for 6-7 weeks of the year, then doing some other event work on the side, or doing some consulting in between that, or the whole way through. So I think it's when you do get a bit of a circuit breaker like that, it kind of forces you to get creative, but then you realize actually there's so many options to do a lot of different things, which can be quite enjoyable.
And I think that's such a good way to put it. I think COVID has been that for a lot of people, like a real circuit breaker in deciding what they actually want to do and where they want to live their life, essentially. But I think health and sport is a really big industry. It's so massive that not everyone that works in that is a healthcare practitioner. There has to be those people who've come from business, finance, all of those areas, but sometimes there's a really big opportunity for people who do come from a health or sport background to upskill in other areas like the business side and the planning side and the operations side, because then they have both sides of the coin. Because I do think there is quite a difference in your mentality and your goals of how you want to do things, and sometimes it can be really one-sided or really the other side. And so having like experience in both is really helpful, because you can see from the clinical perspective that well, actually in real time, when you're working with this sport, that actually doesn't work. Or in the operations side, you're working with the people who are saying clinically this doesn't work, and they're saying, well, logistically we have to make it work for X, Y, and Z. So I think lots of people are now sort of branching out and doing MBAs and different areas and public health masters and different things like that to really, bridge that gap between operations and health. Yeah.
So you've just had this like incredible once in a lifetime experience in Tokyo. Have you had the chance to reflect on it yet? And if so, what sort of things are you taking away from it?
Well, definitely hotel quarantine. If it gives you one thing, it's a lot of thinking time. Yeah, definitely a few particular things. Just how really lucky I have been to be able to do some of the things in my career, and in particular prior to COVID, with traveling really freely and moving around constantly and having the ability to take up opportunities almost on a whim at times. And now knowing that travel is quite limited and it is really hard to come back to Australia, it definitely changes your decision making about, ducking off overseas to do a contract for a couple of weeks. It's actually much harder now. But the main thing is just how lucky I have been, and to how much you just really have to appreciate every moment of those opportunities, and that they're people you work with, and but definitely it's such a cliche, but like teamwork makes the dream work, because you can't do everything alone, and you're a very small piece of a really big puzzle, and if you can work effectively in a group and communicate with a really big variety of people, that the opportunities will sort of pop up from time to time.
Let alone doing that within the Australian Olympic team of all teams.
Yeah, it's still it was such a whirlwind to be there, and sort of had to arrive, and the day I arrived, I actually hadn't met anyone that I was working with. So I'd been working remotely from Melbourne. Even Kate, who was my supervisor there, she was working from Sydney, and I hadn't seen her in person for a couple of years. So I didn't meet anyone, had only spoken to a few people online, and was doing the role, and then landed and had to sort of walk in and be like, hi, I'm Karina, and you're wearing a mask and a hat, and everyone's like, oh, that's what you look like. Yeah. So that was, pretty funny to arrive and realise all these people I've been working with for months online, we're now all in the same building, and we're meeting them on day one in the Olympic Village.
Wow. Kind of felt like that when we went back to the office. It's kind of like, oh yeah, that's what you look like. I remember that. Like, all good.
Yeah. It's definitely like working from home it's so nice in so many ways, but then going into the office now, you really appreciate, you're like, oh, people.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. It's good seeing people again.
It's hard getting any work done though when you haven't been in, because everyone just wants to catch up.
Yeah. I reckon I was less efficient from the office. You're right. You just speak to people. It was like school. Just constantly speaking to people.
Yeah,
I'd go back to year 12 in a flash if I could.
I would.
Oh, me too. I would love to go back to year 12.
Well,
maybe not year 12 during COVID though.
Yeah, that would be a nightmare.
Different year, yeah.
Yeah, our normal year would have been fun.
Yeah. All right, Karina, we'll leave it there, but it's been absolutely great speaking to you and hearing about your journey from Cirque du Soleil to the Australian Olympic team, the pinnacle, and all things in between, being a physio. But it's been great getting all the insights from what it was like over in Tokyo. There's millions of people who would have loved to be there, and are very envious of your role there as well. So thanks so much for sharing all you did tonight, and good luck for whatever's next in your chapter. Well, there you have it. Karina Chilman. That was a really good chat and a great insight into the Tokyo Olympics, and her role as Covid Liaison Officer. Rubes, some takeaways from you.
Yeah, Ryan. Well, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was, the size, scale, and pressure and the stakes of what Karina was dealing with. And so with all that in mind, she mentioned teamwork is like the number one thing that pulls all together and allows the whole thing to function properly without anybody, collapsing or falling over through burnout or whatever. And so I think for me, like just hearing what that team had to go through and how they had to work together and the importance of it really stood out to me as something that, if you want big operations to happen on a grand scale with high stakes, teamwork is probably the most important thing to make that an effective thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think teamwork, I reckon, would be on every single job application, or it would be in some form of questioning that you're going to get in an interview. When have you worked in a team? So I totally agree. It's one of the main takeaways that I'll be running with after this. Mine was just, I know I said it in the intro, but just open your horizons with a portfolio career. If you want to work in a specific area of sport, doesn't mean you have to earmark that as your entire career. There's opportunities to bounce around and do short-term jobs and also pursue a long-term job. Like, she was a perfect example of how, she worked in Cirque du Soleil and then transitioned to Tokyo. So, that says it all in terms of a portfolio career.
Yeah, absolutely. And then final one for me, Ryan, is get to Paris 2024. The Olympics is going to be on, obviously. So make sure you're there for that. But then, Ryan, SportsGrad is also going to be there. We're going to be there holding the SportsGrad conference as a way to connect the entire sports industry from around the world and give students, grads, people in the industry the chance to connect with new people and form those relationships that hopefully lead to jobs and opportunities, just like Karina has experienced. She told us off air that she met the person who hired her, in New York having drinks at a bar. So perhaps there might be someone out there that you meet having drinks at the SportsGrad conference in 2024 that takes you to LA 2028. I don't know. Who knows, Ryan, baby. But if you want to get involved in that, check out our LinkedIn page. There's some details around how to register your interest there.
Yeah, I've heard some rumours it's being touted as one of the greatest conferences in sports history. So, yeah.
Right,
get there.
So as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be huge. Alrighty. Well, that wraps up today. Be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to chat with you on there. You can find a link in the show notes.